Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. As the vast majority of you probably know by now, EA CEO made some pretty abhorrent comments about what were the reasons for Veilguard's financial lack of success, at least in the eyes of EA. I honestly had made the decision not to cover those comments, which is why this video is only coming out now, even though they occurred a couple of days ago. I purposely was like, hey, I've already had a couple of videos talking about what happened to Veilguard, going through all of this. Is there really anything that to gain by doing yet more content on it? Let's just move on. But David Gaider and Mike Laidlaw have both spoken out about the situation, and it's obvious that it's still impacted many people in my community. A bunch of folks have reached out to me about it, asking for my thoughts. So I said, you know what? Let me go ahead and spin up this video. So let's get into it. So let's start with PC Gamer. And of course, I'll leave a link down in the description below. It sure sounds like Electronic Arts thinks cutting Dragon Age the Veilguard's live service component was a mistake. So what is this referencing? I've mentioned over and over again that a big reason I put the majority of the blame for Veilguard's lack of success on EA is because they tried to force BioWare to make Dragon Age into a live service game. And I think that was a horrible mistake. There was no reason to believe BioWare would be successful in this venture. And when Corinne Bush and John Epler took over the project, one of the things that they did is basically have that conversation with EA and say, look, this is not going to work. We've got to go back to our single player RPG roots that the series faithful are known for. And they were successful in that. So Veilguard was a single player RPG, no live service elements, no microtransactions. It was absolutely in multiple ways, as far as that element, a callback to the original Dragon Age games. And I think that was an amazing move. And I talked about in my review, I felt like they weren't getting enough credit for that they were not getting enough credit for not only convincing EA to do a 180 on that, but also still releasing the game bug free. And now that it has turned out to not reach the financial expectations that EA has, what is happening? They're basically saying, oh, well, you know, clearly it should have been live service all the time. Who actually believes that? Who's even interested in a all the way live service Dragon Age game? Nobody. The vast majority of the faithful fans have no interest in that type of game whatsoever. But moving on, CEO Andrew Wilson said Veilguard had a high quality launch. It was well reviewed, but failed to resonate with gamers who want shared world features. So if we scroll down, CEO Andrew Wilson thinks the decision to ditch the live service elements of Veilguard was a mistake. Q3 was not the financial performance we wanted or expected, Wilson said during today's financial calls. We know as a leader in global entertainment, great titles, even when built and delivered with polished execution, can sometimes miss our financial expectations. In order to break beyond the core audience, gamers need to directly connect to the evolving demands of players who increasingly seek shared world features and deeper engagement alongside high-quality narratives in this beloved category. Dragon Age had a high-quality launch and was well-reviewed by critics and those who played. However, it did not resonate with a broad enough audience in this highly competitive market. Just about all of that is nonsense. Basically, what Andrew is trying to say is that the game itself is fine. The product that we put on the market there was no issues with it and very, very highly reviewed. The problem is it didn't have any sort of live service component. And gamers today, they really require a live service component in order to feel connected with certain games. And if it had that, Veilguard would clearly be so much more successful. That doesn't make any sense. Was Veilguard very well reviewed at first? Sure, there are a lot of upfront people who said, hey, this is game of the year, 10 out of 10, Dragon Age is back, BioWare's back, etc., etc. Once it got into the hands of the players, it was obvious this was not up to par with the original games in the series. It's just not. My review made that very, very clear. I think there are a lot more positive elements of this game than many people are willing to give it credit for, but it's absolutely the weakest Dragon Age game in the series, and it should be better. So the idea that live service is what's missing when there are core components of the actual game that are so weak compared to what we've seen before, that's just not consistent with reality. And again, my opinion, a big reason these core components are so much weaker is because of the tumultuous dev cycle, and because they basically had to take a live service game that had been worked on for 2, 3, 4 years and figure out how to warp it into a single player RPG experience. This is not the way game development is supposed to work. Now, in case you thought Andrew was the only bozo at EA, the Chief Financial Officer, Stuart Canfield, echoed his statements in his own comments on Veilguard. Historically, blockbuster storytelling has been the primary way our industry has brought beloved IP to players. The game's financial performance highlights the evolving industry landscape and reinforces the importance of our actions to reallocate towards our most significant and highest potential opportunities. Now, let's be clear, there are very, very compelling reasons for why EA wants Dragon Age to be a live service series so badly. Lest there be any doubt, Wilson also noted during today's call that live services represent 74% of EA's business. Specifically, as reported in EA's Form 8K filing, EA earned $7.347 billion in calendar year 2024. Of that, $5.449 billion came from live services and other. That's a big chunk of change that you're not going to get from one and done video game sales. And it feels it's what Canfield is referring to when he says most significant and highest potential opportunities, especially since he refers to blockbuster storytelling in the past tense. This has people absolutely terrified about Mass Effect 5. Right? Because Dragon Age, they're clearly putting down the back burner. We may never see another Dragon Age title again, especially if Mass Effect 5 doesn't do well. But EA is publicly making it clear that they believe they have the bully pulpit to say, hey, Mass Effect 5, if we really want to give gamers the best value, if we want to do the most to give gamers the type of experience that they're looking for, it absolutely needs to be live service. And I could not disagree more. It's so unfortunate. Mike Gamble has come out publicly and said the Mass Effect game he's working on is going to be consistent with the original series. It's going to be a return to form, all of that good stuff. He's saying all the things that longtime fans want to hear, but it'll be very, very interesting to see what is the actual product we get a few years from now. Now, before we get into the comments from Mike Gamble and David Gaider, I think it's also important to firmly establish why this is so terrible. Some studios are simply not set up in order to be able to do live service games well. Even studios that are set up to do it well oftentimes flounder and fail. It's not some magic pill or magic switch where, hey, we're going to make a live service game and we made a good game before, so obviously this is going to be great. That's not the case at all. And if you need an example of that, look no further than Warner Brothers. This article was published today on Kotaku. Wonder Woman game reportedly struggling with new Batman still many years away. Warner Brothers game studios are in disarray following the failures of both Suicide Squad and Multiverses. Multiverses was actually a highly regarded live service game at first. There were a lot of people who loved it, but unfortunately, while it took off at first, eventually it floundered. Suicide Squad was obvious to everybody, immediately dead on arrival. Rocksteady is not built to make these live service games, and frankly, BioWare isn't either. This is according to a new report by Bloomberg that provides status updates for each of the company's main studios, detailing how projects like Wonder Woman have failed to progress, while others, like the new Batman Arkham game, are still years away from becoming a reality. So not only have Warner Brothers seriously damaged themselves by trying to go all in on these live service projects, but they're also now in a situation where single player RPGs that can help steady the ship at least a little bit are several years away from being put out to market. And so they're kind of just dead in the water right now, which is frankly the situation EA might be soon headed towards. All right, now let's get into some of the commentary from a couple of major figures who were involved with the success of the original Dragon Age series. First is Mike Laidlaw, and he says, look, I'm not a fancy CEO guy, but if someone said to me, the key to this successful single-player IP success is to make it purely a multiplayer game, no, not a spin-off, fundamentally change the DNA of what people loved about the core game, to me, I'd probably quit that job or something. Just thinking out loud, of course, who'd be silly enough to demand something like that twice? And this is referencing, once again, that EA has been doing this for quite some time, right? First, they forced BioWare into making Anthem. By all accounts, a dismal failure. The marketing was great. Iron Man in a game, hey, we'd be all about it, but it's live service. It's not the type of game BioWare can be successful making, and obviously it floundered. Then they tried to do it again with a follow-up Dragon Age. And keep in mind, this is after Dragon Age Inquisition sold 10 million units. So you had a golden egg. You had something that was really resonating with the fans. You were positioned to potentially catapult this series into a different stratosphere, where maybe it will pull down 15, 20, 25 million for a single player title, and instead you tried to twist it into something it was never meant to be. The studio was completely incapable of making that happen, and now it's in the situation that it's currently in. That is so devastating and destructive. There's no way I cannot give the majority of the blame towards EA for this situation. Moving on, let's look at David Gaider's comments. So he responds to this article from PC Gamer that's basically a commentary on the article I've already went through, basically saying that EA is clearly learning all of the wrong lessons. And he says, if I really dig into my empathy, I can kind of see the thinking here. Like, let's say you don't actually know much about games. You're in a big office with a bunch of other execs who also don't know much about games. What are they all saying? Live games do big numbers. Action games are hot. Your natural response? We should make more action games, and all of our games should have live service. Cha-ching, right? Then some uppity dev spoil your buzz by saying, that doesn't apply equally to all games, or we have an established IP with an audience that has certain expectations. You frown. You go look at their sales. Good, sure, but not as spectacular as live service and action games. Profit's great, but what's the point if you're not #1 in the charts? If they're not making headlines, if the devs can't make it work, this is their fault. This is, after all, the future of gaming. Eventually, you're going to ask yourself why we, the company, even bother with those other games, like single-player games. It's a question you've asked aloud before. The fans bristle, but you're not here to supply every audience with what they want. You're here to make money and increase shared value. Maybe I'm being unkind. There are certainly all sorts of lessons a company could learn from a game like Veilguard. I still haven't played it, so I'm going off what other people have said, but maybe it should have been live service. Being the takeaway seems a bit short-sighted and self-serving. Not that there's any shortage of that when it comes to deciding why a game doesn't do well. For the anti-woke crowd, for instance, there are woke games that do well and woke games that do poorly, and only ones that did poorly did so because they were woke. Says more about them than the game. My advice to EA, not that they care, you have an IP that a lot of people love deeply. At its height, it sold well enough to make you happy, right? Look at what it did best at the point where it sold the most. Follow Larian's lead and double down on that. The audience is still there, and they are waiting. Pure perfection, no notes. No notes. This pretty much conveys exactly the way I feel about the situation. There is no reason Dragon Age can't be successful. There is no reason we cannot yet again have a Dragon Age game that sells 10 million units or even more. But what we need is for both BioWare and EA to double down on what actually made the original series great. Not to try to warp Dragon Age and Mass Effect into something completely different that has never worked for the franchise before. Now, a user named Sasquatch makes an interesting comment. He says, I looked at the sales of other single-player RPGs that aren't runaway successful outliers like BG3, and Dragon Age the Veilguard is right where the rest of the market is. It outsold Metaphor and Persona 3 and came right behind the latest Mario and Luigi RPG. It feels like they, meaning EA, just don't understand the product market. And David Gaider responded to that and said, let's be clear, you don't have those numbers. Nobody outside of EA does, and we only know what they tell us, though the fact they've said little, in fact, says a lot. For a return of the series after 10 years, they wanted numbers they could ballyhoo. Whatever they are, they didn't get them. Does that make Veilguard a failure? Depends on your metric. We have many cases of games that sold well but came under whatever the internal projections forecast for that game were. Whether those were out to lunch or not, to them, they're the only numbers that matter. And this is an interesting discussion to me because many of you commented saying that even when EA released that 1.5 million sold units figure, it's not really sold units because it includes people who are on their subscription service, which I don't believe we have official numbers regarding that. So it's not clear how many people actually took the time to go out and buy Veilguard as opposed to already had access to the subscription service and just played the game due to that access. So we don't really know how well this game did or did not sell. EA is keeping that all close to their chest, but obviously it did not meet their projections, and they're using that as a stick to basically say, hey, everything we do should be live service. And you all already know how I feel about this. I think it's terrible. I think it's absolutely terrible. I have no issue with live service games. Shout out to everybody who loves playing live service games. It just doesn't work for everything. It just does not work for everything. And it's unfortunate to see these publishers trying to take these studios that were known for making incredible single-player games. BioWare made amazing single-player games. Rocksteady made amazing single-player games. Why are you trying to twist these studios into making live service games they're clearly not set up to make? Again, those types of games are very, very difficult to make, even if you are set up to make it happen. Even if you have built your studio from the ground up to make live service games, it's still incredibly hard to make a successful one. So why take a studio that clearly is not built for that and then try to force them into that situation? And then when it doesn't work out and they have to release a single player game that they should have been releasing to begin with, you put it all on them and blame them if it doesn't work out to your financial expectations. It's just not right. It's just not right whatsoever. Like I said before, I have no faith. You can write it down, you take note of it. I have no faith in BioWare at this point. I have no faith in Mass Effect 5. I saw the comments Gamble's made. That's cool. Always felt good about everything that Gamble has done. And it is good that he's at the head of this game. I have zero confidence whatsoever that he is going to be capable of stopping EA from saying this will be live service, make it happen, figure it out. I have zero confidence about that whatsoever. So I am already guarding and steeling myself for Mass Effect 5 to be a game that I deeply dislike, do not enjoy, and potentially, depending on how much it's changed and warped from the original series, maybe even a game I don't bother playing. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I hope you all enjoyed this video as much as you can enjoy and enjoy the overall situation. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, leave a link down below if you enjoyed this content, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.